The rain had been falling since dawn, the kind of slow, soaking rain that turned dirt roads into mud and silence into something heavy, something lonely. And the massive iron gates of the Black Ridge Ranch stood unmoved as a young woman walked toward them with trembling steps, her thin coat clutched tight around her body, her breath shallow, and in her arms a small, shivering puppy wrapped in a faded scarf. The ranch was famous in the county, owned by Cole Blackridge, the richest cowboy anyone had ever known, a man whispered about in diners and gas stations as cold, untouchable, and unreachable. Yet she still came. Because when the world closes every door on you, you knock on the one that scares you the most. Her name was Lily, though no one here knew that. And right now she felt invisible, like a shadow begging the night for mercy. As she reached the porch and gently set the puppy down, his tiny paws trembling, his dark eyes blinking up at her, with pure trust that broke her heart into pieces she would never be able to gather again. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking as if it might disappear altogether. "I tried. I really tried," and the puppy whimpered softly, licking her fingers, as if to say he didn't understand. Why love suddenly felt like goodbye. With shaking hands, she pulled out a folded piece of paper, the edges damp from the rain and from her tears, and wrote just 3 words in uneven letters. "Please take my puppy." She placed the note beside him, kissed his small head one last time, and stood up, forcing herself to turn away before her courage vanished, before she changed her mind and stayed, because staying meant watching him starve with her, and leaving meant at least a chance at life. She barely made it to the edge of the porch when the door behind her creaked open, warm yellow light spilling out like hope she didn't deserve, and a deep voice cut through the rain, calm but commanding, "You don't leave. Something living on my doorstep." Without a reason, and Lily froze as Cole Blackridge stepped into view, tall, broad-shouldered, his hat casting a shadow over eyes that had seen too much of the world to be fooled by lies. He looked at the puppy first, then at the note, then slowly at her, taking in the thin coat, the worn shoes, the way she stood like someone bracing for a blow, and for a moment the rain was the only sound between them. "He's not abandoned," she said quickly, turning back, desperation pouring out of her like blood from a wound. "He's loved. I just don't have anything left to give him." And Cole bent down, lifting the puppy with surprising gentleness for a man known for breaking horses and winning ruthless business deals, the puppy immediately curling into his chest as if he felt safety for the first time. Cole's jaw tightened as he read the note again. Then he looked at Lily with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way that terrified her more than being ignored ever had. "People don't come here unless they're running from something," he said, his voice lower now, almost thoughtful. "So what are you running from?" And Lily laughed bitterly, a broken sound that didn't belong to humor. "Hunger, eviction, the kind of nights where you pretend sleeping means tomorrow will be better." And she swallowed hard, tears mixing with rain on her face. "I just want him to live." And Cole studied her in silence, the kind of silence that weighs your soul, before suddenly saying words she was not prepared to hear, words that stopped her heart completely. "If he stays," he said slowly, "you stay too." And Lily shook her head instantly, panic flashing in her eyes. "No, I can't. This was never about me." But Cole stepped closer, rain soaking his shoulders, his voice steady, unyielding. "Anyone who can give up the only comfort they have so it can survive isn't someone I turn away." And for the first time since she'd arrived, Lily felt something unfamiliar settle into her chest. Hope, fragile and terrifying. The puppy wagged his tail weakly, as if he already knew this place would change everything. And as Lily stood there, soaked and shaking on the porch of the richest cowboy in the county, she had no idea that this single knock on a door was about to unravel secrets, heal wounds, and bind lives together in ways none of them could escape. Because sometimes the smallest acts of love open the biggest doors, and this was only the beginning of a story that would test loyalty, break pride, and redefine what family truly means. And if this moment touched your heart even a little, stay with this story, because what happens next will change everything. What the rain was hiding. The storm did not stop when Lily stepped inside the Blackridge house. It only changed its shape, becoming quieter but heavier, settling into the walls, the air, and the spaces between words. As Cole closed the door behind them and the warmth of the house wrapped around her so suddenly that her knees nearly gave out, because it had been a long time since warmth had belonged to her. the kind that didn't demand something in return. The puppy squirmed in Cole's arms, already calmer, his small body rising and falling in a steady rhythm as if he sensed he had crossed an invisible line between fear and safety. And Lily stood just inside the doorway, dripping rain onto the polished wooden floor, unsure where to put her hands, her eyes darting around the large open room with its stone fireplace, worn leather chairs and quiet signs of a life built carefully and deliberately. Nothing flashy, just solid, permanent, the opposite of everything she knew. "You can sit," Cole said, nodding toward a chair, his tone not unkind but unused to softness, and she obeyed, perching on the edge as if she might be asked to leave at any second, while he disappeared down the hall and returned, with a thick towel, and set it gently on her shoulders. Without a word, the simple gesture hitting her harder than any accusation ever could, because kindness, when you are starving for it, feels almost painful. The puppy was placed on a blanket near the fire, where he immediately curled up and fell asleep, trusting without question, and Lily watched him with a mix of relief and guilt so deep it twisted her chest. Her mind replaying every night she'd gone hungry so he could eat, every time she'd wrapped him in her own sweater to keep him warm, every promise she'd whispered that she hadn't been sure she could keep. Cole poured 2 cups of coffee and set one near her, studying her over the rim of his mug, not like a man judging, but like one trying to understand a puzzle that didn't quite fit. And finally he spoke, his voice low. "You didn't come here by accident." And Lily let out a shaky breath, staring into the dark liquid as if it might give her answers. "I used to pass this ranch on the bus," she said, her voice barely above the crackle of the fire, "when I still had a job, when things still made sense." And she told him about the diner that shut down without warning, the landlord who didn't care about excuses, the weeks spent choosing between food and rent, and the way the puppy found shivering behind a trash bin one winter night had become the only reason she kept getting up in the morning. Cole listened without interrupting, his face unreadable, but something in his eyes shifted when she spoke of the puppy, a flicker of recognition, like he understood what it meant to cling to one living thing when the rest of the world slips away. "Why not a shelter?" he asked quietly, and Lily's mouth tightened. "They were full, or they said he'd be put down if no one took him." And the words came out sharp, like they'd been cutting her from the inside for weeks. "I couldn't do that to him." And for the first time, Cole looked away, his jaw flexing as if her choice had reached somewhere buried deep inside him. The silence stretched again, but it was different now, no longer threatening, and Lily found herself speaking before she could stop, confessing fears she hadn't said out loud even to herself, that staying here would be dangerous because hope had a way of making loss hurt worse, that people like him didn't offer help without strings, that she didn't belong in a house this big or a life this steady. Cole finally stood and walked to the window, rain streaking down the glass as the land beyond disappeared into gray. "I didn't grow up with this," he said suddenly, his voice rougher. "Money, land, all of it came later, after I learned what it feels like to have nothing." And Lily looked up, surprised as he continued. "I was 16 when my father died, 18 when the bank tried to take the ranch, and for a while the only thing I had was a horse that wouldn't give up on me, even when I wanted to." And something about the way he said it told her this wasn't a story he shared often. She saw him then not as the untouchable rich cowboy, but as someone who had survived by holding on just as tightly as she had. And when he turned back to her, his eyes were steady, certain. "You don't owe me anything," he said, cutting off the fear she hadn't voiced. "You'll stay in the guest room, help around the ranch if you want, and when you're back on your feet, you decide what comes next." And Lily shook her head, overwhelmed. "Why?" she whispered. Because generosity without condition made her suspicious, and Cole glanced down at the sleeping puppy. "Because once," he said, "someone took a chance on me when they didn't have to, and the truth of it settled between them like a promise." That night, lying in a clean bed with sheets that smelled of soap instead of damp concrete, Lily stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep, her heart racing with equal parts gratitude and fear, wondering how long this fragile peace could last. And in the quiet she realized something that terrified her more than hunger ever had. She wanted to belong here, and wanting meant risking everything. The next morning would bring work, rules and eyes from the ranch hands who wouldn't understand why a stranger had been allowed inside, and shadows from Cole's past that had not stayed buried as deep as he thought. Because kindness always has consequences, and not all of them are gentle. And as the puppy slept, curled against her chest for the first time without shivering, Lily made a silent promise to prove she was worth the chance she'd been given. Not knowing that the hardest test was still ahead, if this chapter pulled you deeper into their world, don't walk away now. The price of belonging. Morning at Black Ridge Ranch arrived without mercy. The sun breaking through the retreating storm as if the night had never existed, and Lily woke with a start, disoriented by the quiet. By the soft mattress beneath, her and the gentle weight of the puppy curled against her chest, his small body warm and trusting, a reminder that the safety she felt was real, at least for now. And as she sat up and looked around the guest room, clean, simple, untouched by desperation, fear crept in. Because safety that isn't earned always feels temporary, she dressed quickly, choosing the plainest clothes she owned, determined not to look like a charity case, and stepped outside where the ranch was already alive, horses shifting in their stalls, the scent of hay and earth thick in the air, ranch hands moving with practiced ease, their conversations stopping just slightly as they noticed her, curiosity sharp in their eyes, and Lily felt every stare like a question she wasn't prepared to answer. Cole stood near the barn giving instructions, confident and controlled, the same man who'd offered her shelter without hesitation. Yet here he looked distant again, wrapped in authority, and when his gaze met hers there was a flicker of acknowledgement, nothing more, as if to remind her that whatever kindness existed between them would not shield her from the reality of this place. "You can help Clara in the kitchen or stay out of the way," one of the hands muttered as he passed, not unkind but not welcoming either. And Lily chose the kitchen. Because contributing felt safer than hiding, because work was the only language she trusted. Clara, older and sharp-eyed, watched Lily chop vegetables with silent assessment before finally saying, "He doesn't bring people here," and Lily's hand stilled, her throat tightening as she answered honestly, "I know," and Clara nodded slowly, as if that answer mattered more than any excuse. Outside whispers grew, speculation blooming faster than weeds, some saying Lily was a con artist, others that she was Cole's latest mistake, and Lily felt the weight of it pressing down, the familiar ache of being unwanted returning with sharp clarity. But she kept working because leaving wasn't an option anymore, not when the puppy, now named Rusty by the ranch hands without asking, was chasing his own tail in the dirt, already belonging in a way she wasn't sure she ever could. Trouble arrived, just after noon in the form of a black truck rolling through the gates, its presence changing the air instantly, and Cole stiffened as he saw it, Lily noticing the tension before she understood it. Before a man stepped out wearing a polished smile that didn't reach his eyes, dressed too clean for ranch work, carrying the kind of confidence that came from knowing where all the pressure points were, and when Cole greeted him, his voice was polite but cold. "Didn't expect you, Grant," and Lily caught only fragments of the conversation. Debts, land boundaries, permits. But she saw the way Grant's eyes flicked toward her with interest, predatory and sharp as if he smelled weakness. Later, alone near the fence, Grant approached her under the pretense of friendliness, his tone smooth. Didn't know Cole? Had guessed these days, and Lily's instinct screamed at her to step back. Yet she held her ground, answering simply, "I'm just helping out," and Grant smiled wider, leaning in just enough to invade her space. "Careful," he murmured. "Men like him don't help without a reason," and the words burrowed into her mind like poison, because they echoed the fears she'd already been fighting. When Cole found them, his anger was immediate and unmistakable, his hand tightening into a fist as he told Grant to leave, the tension between them thick with history Lily could only guess at. And as the truck disappeared down the road, Cole turned to her with frustration barely contained. "Stay away from him," he warned, not explaining, not apologizing, and Lily nodded, though unease coiled tighter in her chest, because warnings without explanations felt like traps. That night, after the ranch had settled and the puppy slept near the fire, Lily overheard raised voices from Cole's office. Grant's name spoken with bitterness, words like foreclosure and leverage cutting through the walls, and she understood then that this place, this safety wasn't as secure as it seemed, that her presence might be complicating something already fragile. Guilt returned full force, whispering that she didn't belong in a fight that wasn't hers, that she was a liability. And when Cole finally emerged, exhaustion etched into his face. She confronted him, her voice shaking but firm. "If I'm a problem, tell me," and Cole stopped, surprised by her directness, his eyes searching hers as if weighing truth against pride. "You're not the problem," he said at last. But the hesitation before his answer told her there was more he wasn't saying. Sleep came fitfully. Lily's dreams filled with doors closing and Rusty left alone in the rain. And before dawn she made a decision that hurt, worse than leaving ever had. She would go before she became the reason. Cole lost everything. Quietly she packed what little she had, leaving behind the towel he'd given her, the borrowed boots and a note that trembled with every word, thanking him for kindness she hadn't earned and apologizing for a burden she refused to become. And as she carried Rusty toward the door, tears blurring her vision, a voice stopped her cold. "If you walk out now," Cole said from the shadows, "you'll never know how strong you really are." And Lily turned, breaking, confessing everything, the fear of being unwanted, the shame of needing help, the terror of staying and losing it all again, and Cole listened, really listened, before saying something that changed the shape of her choice entirely. "Belonging isn't free," he said quietly. "It costs trust, it costs courage, and sometimes it costs standing your ground when running feels safer." And he placed Rusty gently back on the floor, where the puppy trotted between them as if refusing to choose sides. In that moment, Lily realized this wasn't about charity or rescue anymore. It was about deciding whether she would keep letting fear write her story. And as the sun rose over Blackridge Ranch, she unpacked her bag, knowing the real test had just begun, because Grant would not stop. The past would not stay silent, and the price of belonging was about to be demanded in full. And if this chapter tightened your chest and kept you listening, don't leave now. You stay too. The day everything nearly fell apart began quietly, the kind of quiet that feels wrong when you've learned to listen for danger. And Lily woke before the sun. Rusty pressed against her side, his steady breathing grounding her as she stared at the ceiling and understood with aching clarity that belonging was no longer an idea, but a choice she had already made, whether she was brave enough to admit it or not. The ranch moved slower that morning, whispers replaced by glances, as if everyone sensed the tension tightening around Blackridge Ranch, and Cole's face was set with a determination Lily hadn't seen before, a resolve that told her whatever was coming, he intended to face it head on. The black truck returned just after noon, dust swirling as Grant stepped out again, this time without a smile, papers in hand and men in suits trailing behind him like shadows. And Lily's stomach dropped as she realized this wasn't intimidation anymore. It was an execution, legal and merciless. Grant announcing coldly that the bank had accelerated the debt, that the land along the eastern fence would be seized by week's end, and the ranch hands stood frozen, anger and fear warring in their eyes as decades of work threatened to vanish in a single breath. Cole listened without interruption, his silence heavier than shouting, and when Grant finally stopped talking, waiting for defeat, Cole said something that surprised everyone, including Lily. "You're not taking it," and Grant laughed, sharp and humorless, turning his gaze to Lily as if she were proof of Cole's weakness, sneering that sentiment didn't win battles, that people like her were liabilities. And something in Lily snapped, years of being invisible and disposable burning away in an instant. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the air, confessing that Grant had approached her, tried to use her fear as leverage, and the ranch fell silent, Grant's face darkening as he denied it too quickly, too forcefully, while Cole's eyes never left Lily's, pride and gratitude mixing with something deeper, something unspoken. The confrontation escalated, words turning to threats, until Clara emerged from the house with a stack of old documents, revealing a detail. Grant had counted on everyone, forgetting a clause from Cole's father that protected the eastern land if it remained in active use by the community, and Lily realized then why Cole had allowed her to stay, why he had opened the ranch to more than just business. Because survival wasn't just about land or money. It was about people. Grant left in fury, promising this wasn't over. But the damage was done, not to the ranch, but to the walls Cole had built around himself. And as the dust settled, the ranch hands looked at Lily differently, not as a burden, but as someone who had stood her ground when it mattered. That night, under a sky washed clean by stars, Lily sat on the porch with Rusty asleep at her feet, exhaustion and relief weaving together when Cole joined her, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, thanking her not just for speaking up, but for staying. And Lily admitted that she had almost run again. That fear still lived in her bones, And Cole nodded, understanding in his eyes. It never leaves, he said. You just learn not to let it decide for you. And in the quiet that followed, he offered her something no one ever had. Not charity, not shelter, but partnership. A place on the ranch not as a guest, but as family. Her work valued, her presence wanted. Lily's tears came freely then. Not from pain, but from release. From the realization that she no longer had to prove she deserved to exist. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept a place when it's offered with honesty. Weeks passed, the ranch stronger for what it had weathered, Rusty growing into his paws, chasing horses and hearts alike, and Lily finding her rhythm, her laughter returning in pieces. The porch that had once been a place of goodbye now holding evenings, of shared stories and quiet understanding. One night, as Lily locked up the barn, she found Cole waiting, his hat in his hands, nerves visible for the first time. And he said the words that echoed that rainy night where it all began, his voice low but certain. You didn't just bring a puppy to my door. You brought life back into this place. And Lily smiled through tears, understanding at last that the richest thing about Blackridge Ranch had never been the land or the money, but the people who chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. And as Rusty bounded between them, tail wagging like a promise, Lily knew that some doors once opened with love never truly close again. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something real, remember this. Every subscription helps keep stories like this alive. So subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who needs hope, and stay with us for more stories that remind us all that sometimes, when you ask someone to take what you love most, they don't just say yes, they whisper you stay too.